Very nice. I'll turn the camera on. Okay, so we're Familia 1 group, and this is the final project. And yeah, and we have um, Yanni right now, and Danica, and Ahmed, and I'm the mentor for this family. My name is Monty, and we're actually doing this in two parts. First part is going to be the first 10 slides, and the reason why we're doing it is because Ashley can't make it right now, and we're going to be doing another part tomorrow, and we'll just combine this together, make it part 1 and part 2. All right.
So the first part, I'm Yenny too. So the first part, one of the main points we learn in our class is the taxon ban, including ban the Mexican American ethnic studies, as well as certain books they're using in these classes. So here's the statement we quote in the No Reader is Illegal by Professor Mark, as well as certain books they're using in these classes. Here's a statement we quote in the No Reader is Illegal by Professor Mark Corradona, Professor Giordino, and Professor Silva. The Tucson Unified School District banned its thriving Mexican American Study program and censors beloved texts taught in the program. Bureaucrats, short-sighted legislators, and school administrators have tried to keep hidden from young readers in 21st century public education classrooms the students' own stories. Yes. Here's a video about debating on democracy between John Huppenthal and Richard Martinez. So in the video, Superintendent of Public Instruction John Huppenthal said the Tucson attorney Richard Martins. Okay, so in the video, Superintendent of Public Instruction John Huppenthal said he has read these books that have been banned to familiarize himself with issues in hand. But what he's concerned about is how those books have been used. And he emphasized again, it's okay for people to use these books in class, but they should be very careful. For example, if we find a teacher who wasn't using it to explore the issues critically, but using it as Bible, then it will be very terrible. And this is how teachers cross the line in the school. But on the other hand, the Tucson attorney Richard Martins, who presents students and teachers, make a disagreement to his debate opponent. He said, what has occurred here is that Huppenthal has taken away from our entire community a curriculum that was adopted by our school board, that was developed by our school district, and that has successfully operated for over 10 years. It's just part of the same kind of tactics that have been employed in Arizona reflected by 1070, the anti-immigrant perspective. Is the anti-Latino perspective that exists in this state. So basically, this is one of the main points they were arguing in the video. So next slide. So next slide is the author, Norrand, mentioned how the student feeling about banned books and Mexican American study in their school. So he said, students said the banned books were seized from their classroom and out of their hands. After Tucson School banned Mexican American study, including a book of photos of Mexico. Crying, students said it was like not Germany, and they were unable to sleep since it happened. And next slide, here are 7 books that have been confiscated, such as Critical Race Theory and 500 Years of Chicano History in Pictures, Message to Aztlan, Occupy America, A History of Chicano, and Chicano, The History of Mexican Civil Rights Movement, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and finally the Rethinking Columbus, The Next 500 Years. So, and many of texts among these books are collected and organized in the book In No Reader is Illegal.
2 articles that we're focusing on is the first one called Canada Apologizes to Its Native People by Bob Peterson, and a little poem called Legal Alien by Pat Mora. And the first article, the Canada related one, is when the Canadians apologized publicly to the native people because of their past treatment, and they pledged to support native self-government. And also the government decided to focus on problems such as jobs and suicide and poverty rates. And also this initiative was hailed by the head of the National Assembly of the Indian Chiefs as a, quote, historic opportunity. And then there were cases before the Canada apologized, that there were cases of students that were beaten, raped, and had suicides relative to schools at which there was the bad treatment happened. So then the guy named Phil Fontaine, who is the Grand Chief of the Assembly of First Nations, pointed out that this was like the time when they needed to apologize and embrace the native people that were of Canada. And in the article, Gerald Morin, who's president of the Métis National Council of the native people, said that this initiative offers very little because it still excludes them from getting land claims that could lead to self-government, which shows that Canada might still not fully give them everything back, but somewhat. And then the next poem, or the next article, is next slide. The Legal Alien poem. It's basically about a Mexican American who feels unaccepted from both sides of his heritage. From the American part, he's fluent in English but viewed as a Mexican, and as a Mexican, he is viewed as an American, but he stays true to his Mexican tradition. And the one interesting part of the poem is the part which says, their eyes say, quote, "You may speak Spanish, but you're not like me." That shows how they managed to treat this Mexican American differently by just basically picking on both sides of his bicultural.
Can you repeat that? What was the line?
The line was it's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the 12th line in the poem, and it starts off. It's in parentheses, and it's their eyes say, quote, "You may speak Spanish, but you're not like me," end quote. I picked that's the most interesting quote because it's in the parentheses, which is if you take it out, the poem's not affected, but because it's there in parentheses, it shows a more deeper view into how important this discrimination is in terms of this poem. How we relate these two is that that this poem is talking about discrimination and how the individual feels it, and then the other article about Canada, it's you can see Canada as a country like did this type of discrimination to its people in the form of which is similar to that poem. And yeah, that's to summarize it up.
So this is like discrimination from your own people, right?
Yeah, from who you live with.
So it's like if, he's speaking Spanish just because he looks. Um, was he Mexican?
He's both Mexican, Mexican American.
So yeah, just because he looks Mexican, the other Mexicans that are around him that speak Spanish, they might
They make fun
they're
of him for that.
they're making fun of him just because he's brought up in a different culture than them, but in reality he's just like he looks just like them, but he acts and talks like any other American, right?
Yeah.
So and so the discrimination is there. You want to talk about the racism?
Yeah. So the definition of racism is as stated on the slide, and then picked out from the article. The first Canada example says in it, like I picked out a part of it, and it's initiative of that I basically stated before, in which Canada did not give the natives like the ability to have its own land because Canada, I think, is scared of them having their own self-government, which is still being racist, even though they like promised to be more kinder towards the native after a brutal history of not being like kind to them. And then in the poem, it was what we were discussing before as how he's viewed by Mexicans as an alien and as American to Mexicans and Mexican to Americans. So what we were talking about how he speaks Spanish, but to the other Spanish people he speaks English too, and to the English people he speaks Spanish. So they see racism in that.
What's the difference? Yeah, what's the difference between discrimination and racism? Kind of.
Discrimination is like at a larger scale with a larger group of people.
Yeah, for
And
any group, not necessary to be race. Can be a gender, job, or anything.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was just like, yeah, racism is just toward one race, right?
yeah.
So, do you guys think when you're just like that one example, for the Mexican person, his um, other family members or friends who are Mexican, they're uh, not treating him right. Where does that fit in? Is that racism or discrimination?
Can you say that again?
Remember the example of the Mexican guy where he was brought up here in the U.S. and his peers who are Mexican, they were not treating him right just because he acts and talks just like in Americans. So where does that fit in? Is that racism, discrimination?
I would stick to racism.
Racism towards your own race. Yeah. Like, yeah, that could be it. It's hard to judge because it's not towards a certain race. They're discriminating within themselves. So it's like,
Trayvon Martin's case was brought to national news because he was shot by a half white, half Hispanic man, and then the other guy was shot by a black man. Discrimination and racism today. There is a law in Arizona which requires police to check the immigration status of anyone they suspect of illegally being in the country. So if you seem or if you look like you're from another country, police have the right to ask you for your paperwork, even though sorry.
Yeah, even though you might have just born and living in this country for years, they can still ask you for your papers. That's kind of really stupid, right?
Yeah, like if you look like you're from another country, then they'll just ask you for paperwork.
That's in a way racism. It's like to the max. It's like what's that word? Uh, Never mind, it slipped up. But it's like it's kind of offensive for the person who's been born and brought up in America. And
Yeah, this mostly goes out towards Hispanics because of how it's close to the border. So even if you're an American born but Hispanic, they still question you because you look like you're from the other side, which is pretty much racist.
yeah, I mean, imagine how would Hispanic people feel about this. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And for the second one, for U.S. government's no-fly list, there's a list. They use a list for every flight to see if you're on the if you're not allowed to fly from the U.S. to the U.S. or over the U.S.
what does that mean? No, what can you explain
No-fly
that?
list, like
Is
so
it for everyone or?
not everyone, like if you're if you're caught as an alien, you fly back to your country and you're on the no-fly list because you have no paperwork, and you're not allowed to fly to the US or over the US or anything at all. Yeah.
So let's say if you're undocumented and they um, it's and they somehow find out that you've been living here for long and without papers.
Oh, it's
And
also the no-fly list is a list created and maintained by the government's terrorist screening center. Also, just to keep everything safe around here. That's also what it's used for.
oh, just for the so-called quote-unquote terrorists that might come here for jobs and to support their families. I mean,
If you're a threat to the U.S. or anything, you're not allowed to be in any U.S. aircrafts or anything like that.
so does it go to undocumented people who don't have their papers? It's only if the government think that you might be a threat to the national security, right? And then they could put you in no-fly list.
Mhm.
Interesting.
So for the next slide, it's comparing two cases, Trayvon Martin and Marley Lyon. So Martin was shot by a half-white and Hispanic man under self-defense, while Marley Lyon was shot and killed by a African-American man. And this goes towards racism because Martin was shot by Hispanic and it made national news, while Lyon was shot by a black man, which didn't really get in the media.
Yeah, that's more like a yeah. It's kind of it is racism. They're trying to point out like they want people to think that Hispanics are doing these bad things, and when
Mhm.
so they can focus more on these rules, or like these to check their papers and everything. So people won't question when they put out these rules. Let me check. Let me go to the back one. The show me your papers. So if they have these news running on the TV, and that this 17-year-old got shot by a 30-year-old white Hispanic man, um, they can basically um, influence people into thinking that most Hispanic are bad, right?
Mhm.
So in the end, they can pass these laws, and no one would question them. Everyone would just be like, it's what needed to be done. But people, but and then on the other side, if anything like the 17-year-old killed by a 30-year-old black man on his way to rob a bar, and they're not going to show it because it's not their concern, right?